You're listening to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago.
Good evening, all you weird and wonderful beings, and welcome to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago. This is TJ Fanpool, aka Turbo TJ, reporting to you live on TikTok. Tonight, WTMFI is your resource for Star Wars Fact of the Day Weekly Review. During the week, we bring you Star Wars facts Monday through Friday. Then on Sunday, we do a live review of all the facts, bringing you all the information we have researched from StarWars.com and Wikipedia.com. I hope you will stick with us through this show and take part in the chat at the end. Now, a little something about your host, me. I'm a diehard Star Wars fan, but not just of the movies of the original trilogy. I have been following Star Wars since I was a kid, starting with the original trilogy, but I didn't lose that interest at the end of the trilogy. My passion for Star Wars made it a part of my whole self, and I fueled that with books, comics, and all the additional reading and additional films and animations that came out after it to expand my knowledge and lore of the Star Wars universe. So, I hope you all stick with me so far. Abby of the Dark Side, welcome in. Thank you for being part of the show tonight, at least in the audience. Your spirit is always welcome. And unfortunately, I don't know how many people are in right now. Abby, I think you're just the only one. If anybody else is in the chat, please make yourself known. And we'll start going through it. I am so sorry I'm running late tonight. I was out of town picking my kid up from Ohio and visiting with my in-laws and spending the 4th of July out there. So I just got back into the town less than an hour ago, and I had so much to do trying to prep for the show, so I had to start late tonight. But thankfully, I was able to get on. I was able to get live, so we're live right now, and I was able to start the show. So we'll be moving into the facts in just a minute. Let me just get my here. There it is. Okay. I'm also changing a few things around. I'm adding in a few things because I wanted to try and expand on the show. So we'll see how things go. Let's start moving forward with the facts. So we'll start with the very first fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day. Kashyyyk is the Wookiee homeworld covered in dense Warsher tree-covered forests located in the southwestern quadrant of the galaxy. A temperate jungle planet orbiting around a single star located in the Meridianor sector of the Mid-Rim. The planet had a complement of 3 moons, one of which was orange. The planet has no axial tilt and a perfectly circular orbit, causing it to lack in seasons. The center of the planet was covered with a tropical ocean belt, which contained a number of islands and large coral reefs. Kashyyyk served as homeworld to the Wookiee species. Native fauna such as cancels would influence the design of starships by the Wookiee inhabitants, while great cities such as Kashyyyk would be built into the planet's trees. Kashyykian wilds could be dangerous to many thanks to dangerous animals such as Pterotectics and Worcestershire spiders, in addition to carnivorous plants such as the jaw plant and savan. Discovered by the Kashyyyk Corporation, who enslaved the Wookiee population using superior technology. The Wookiees remained enslaved until an uprising drove the oppressors away. That painful episode left lasting scars in the Wookiees' hearts. Later, the Wookiees would send a delegation to the Galactic Republic and gain representation in the Senate. Welcome, Deadpool. Kashyyyk was in the same star system as Trandoshan, the home of the Trandoshan species, who were traditional enemies of the Wookiees. Trandoshan hunters would often kidnap Wookiees to hunt for sport. This has left a lasting animosity between the two species. During the Clone Wars, Kashyyyk was attacked multiple times by the Trade Federation and Separatist forces. The Wookiees were able to repel these invaders, but not without Separatist forces gaining a foothold on the archipelagos. In the final days of the Clone Wars, Jedi Masters Yoda and Luminara led an army of clone forces to push the remaining Separatists off the planet. The events of Order 66 took place despite Kashyyyk's loyalty to the Republic. The self-appointed Emperor had the Wookiees enslaved. Trandoshan mercenaries were contracted by the Empire and supplied with incinerator tanks. Under the supervision of clone stormtroopers, the Trandoshans were tasked with burning down large sectors of forests on the planet in an effort to make way for Imperial industrialization. The Wookiee population on Kashyyyk suffered tremendously during the reign of the Empire. The New Republic was able to lead a liberation force to Kashyyyk, and Han Solo personally led a rebellion with the Wookiees to finally end the enslavement of their species. So welcome to everybody who came in. I'm sorry I was so busy reading and focusing on that, I didn't get a chance to say hello. So Tracy, Andy, and everybody else who came in, please let yourself be known in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm so glad you were able to come in. I just got finished with the first fact of the day, which is about the planet Kashyyyk, which is the homeworld of the Wookiees. And this planet has a lot of tremendous history. I recommend anybody who's interested in learning more about the Wookiees. I know so many people are fans of Chewbacca from the original trilogy. He's one of the few of the main characters that survived throughout the entire saga, from the prequel trilogy to the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy. So I highly recommend checking out the entire history of the Wookiees. They were featured, of course, in the holiday special, and of course, there's the information that originally for Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Jedi, that the whole event that was supposed to take place with the second Death Star was supposed to take place on Kashyyyk, and the Wookiees were actually supposed to be involved. But of course, we know now that it was the Ewoks who were involved, and the planet was the moon of Endor. So, but still, it was great in the prequel trilogy. We finally got to see what Kashyyyk looked like, and we got to see what the Wookiees were like in battle. Sorry for lost service. Oh, no worries, Tracy. Hey, I was running late tonight. I mean, I was over an hour and a half late because I was traveling back. So no worries about anybody being late. And thank you all for coming in. If you're interested in my subject, please tap on the screen. Give me some likes. If you're interested in giving gifts, I have rolls up right now. But please feel free to give whatever you're interested in. No worries if you're not interested in doing that. But just tap on the screen is a great help. Sharing the live out is also a great supporting tool. I really appreciate it. But the reason why I wanted to cover Kashyyyk is because it has such an interesting history. It's one of the few planets that has a species that has not only been enslaved multiple times, but also has a long-standing rivalry with another species from the same system. What I'm talking about is the Wookiees and the Trandoshans. Now, many know the Trandoshans because of the bounty hunter Bosk, B-O-S-S-K, and he was featured in the original trilogy in Empire Strikes Back as one of the bounty hunters that was sent out to hunt for Han Solo. And you also, in the Clone Wars series, you get a really good look at the Trandoshans because they are featured multiple times, specifically with trapping multiple different preys from multiple planets and then hunting them on their homeworld sport worlds. And we actually see, if you remember from the Clone Wars, Ahsoka Tano was one of the Jedi that were actually kidnapped by the Trandoshans and brought to the world to hunt for sport. And of course, the hunters were so good at trapping and like basically stealing people from other planets to hunt them that most of the time they went missing and they were never found. And this is the interesting thing about this, is that Ahsoka goes through this with several Padawans that were actually captured, and they were hunted as well. They lost their lightsabers and basically had to rely completely on the use of the Force in order to actually fight the Trandoshans. And the Trandoshans are a reptile species, a very hostile species. And I'm planning on doing a fact of the day specifically about them in the future, but I really wanted to touch on them because they are the natural prey and foe of the Trandoshans. Consistently kidnap them and hunt them on their own worlds. Now, the Wookiees, of course, don't do that, but I think that's an aspect that you see, that the Trandoshans see the Wookiees as a weak species because they don't do that kind of thing. Now, the Wookiee warriors are extremely powerful, and the Wookiees are a strong species and have great strength and ability. And that is something that we see with the character of Black Chrysanthemum. Now, if you don't know about him, he has been written about in the Marvel Comics Star Wars series. He was also brought up in the expanded universe of Star Wars before the purchase of Star Wars to Disney. But he was reinvented in Marvel Comics as a bounty hunter, but also as a major mercenary who works for Dr. Aphra. And he was basically her muscle when she was going on multiple events and exploration tasks for Darth Vader. And we finally actually got Black Chrysanthemum to show up in the Book of Boba Fett series, which so many fans were so excited for, because it's the first time we've seen a Wookiee that was a bounty hunter and mercenary beyond Chewbacca and some of the other Wookiees from the prequel series. And the big thing about Black Chrysanthemum, and I'm going to go into this a little more, but he's one of the few that have gone into the pits, similar to that of another particular character that started out in Clone Wars as a baby, and we are reintroduced to in The Mandalorian and Grogu. So this is another thing that ties together the Clone Wars series with the expanded universe that is now of Star Wars through Disney, through the Disney Plus movies and TV series. So if you get a chance to look him up, his comics are so interesting, and he actually went one-on-one with Chewbacca in the comics. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I highly recommend you check it out. But this is the reason why I wanted to cover Kashyyyk, because the Wookiee species is so interesting, and there's so many interesting facts about the species. Like, the planet itself is extremely hostile. Mal, welcome in. Thank you all for coming in. And it's really interesting to actually look up about the whole aspect about all the hostile species that are in there. And they've actually gone back and visited Kashyyyk a few times in the Star Wars canon, and I've actually read about it a couple times because they've referenced it in a lot of the books from the expanded universe, which I spent so much time reading and memorizing so much information because I wanted to be able to bring it out for like competitions and stuff like that, and just having, you know, one-offs of knowledge with some of my fellow nerds and stuff like that when I was in college. But of course, now a lot of that information is lost in my brain because I've had to abandon a lot of that because of the expanded universe no longer being canon. But that doesn't mean I still don't love it. And I love referencing it because the stuff is still there and it's still referenceable. But there is so much about Kashyyyk that is so interesting. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to watch a lot of the stuff that's available on Disney Plus, I can recommend that Kashyyyk, of course, is in the prequels, in Revenge of the Sith. It is also featured several times in the Clone Wars series, and it is also referenced in the Bad Batch. There's a very specific episode that has to do with the Padawan Jedi youngling Gunji, who is a Padawan of the Jedi who survives Order 66. Now, we don't find out exactly how he survived, but it's interesting that he is returned by the Bad Batch to Kashyyyk, and you find out that he doesn't even know where his village is. And this is an interesting thing because that means that Gunji was taken from his planet, you know, by his village allowed him to join with the Jedi Order, but this was done when he was very young. And this is something else, that there is another Wookiee that is actually featured in the Star Wars Acklay series, which predates the original prequel trilogy. So I always find it so interesting to find out new information about Wookiees, because we learned so much about Chewbacca. And, you know, for those of you who watched the holiday special, which I personally have not, but there's so much information to find out about the Wookiees. Their culture is so interesting, and the thing that I really like the most about the Wookiees is that they are so in tune with their planet and the way things work and the cultures and species that exist on that planet. It's very similar to that of the Ewoks, where they are a species that is what you call a homage species to the planet. It is a natural species that grew from the planet, from the conditions that exist. Very similar to that of human beings being the natural species of the earth, and all the other species that exist through evolution have evolved. And the Wookiees are the prime example of a natural species evolving. And I just find it so interesting to find out those facts, that are brought up in Star Wars, and it's always interesting for me. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day. Acklays are amphibious reptilian crustaceans with 6 deadly claws and razor-sharp teeth native to the planet Vendaxa. The gigantic creature was protected by a hard, shell-like carapace of bony nodules. They walk on 6 hardened, skin-covered claws and grappling hands. Its mouth is filled with razor-sharp teeth and used an organ beneath its chin to sense the body electricity given off by its prey, which it would then spear with its pointed legs. The species had stomachs and 3 eyes. Yes, it's Ryan. Welcome in. They speared their prey with their claws, biting through them with their sharp teeth and snapping limbs or swallowing them into their stretchy stomachs. Vicious creatures possessing agile fury and bestial rage, Acklays were known for their bite being extraordinarily strong. The vicious Acklay was one of 3 arena creatures unleashed in the Geonosian execution arena, dispatched to kill Anakin Skywalker, Padme Amidala, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Geonosian Pittators steered the Acklay toward Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was able to outmaneuver the beast. The clumsy yet powerful strike from one of the claws sheared the chains that bound Kenobi. The beast continued to pursue the Jedi Knight, rendering large holes in the hard-packed sand with its vicious stabs. It even shrugged off a pike attack, chomping through the offending polearm with bestial rage. The beast was eventually brought down when Obi-Wan Kenobi retrieved his lightsaber and disabled the Acklay with several precision cuts. Now, one of my favorite things to do with Facts of the Day is to touch on one of the other species in Star Wars, and the Acklay is just one of the scarier ones that we've encountered. Where's your favorite look for... we're not talking about DC right now, Bad Night, but I will definitely talk to you about that in a little bit once we get through all the Star Wars facts. But thanks for coming in. One of the other interesting things about this guy is that as I was researching it, it finds out that their stomach, which you can see right in the center there, does expand even further depending upon the size of the thing that it eats. So it actually is a lot bigger than people think. And it's really interesting that we got to see these. And this is something that is really great that I love about Star Wars is you get all these interesting species that show up every once in a while. And they don't happen very often, but you do find out about them. Thanks to George Lucas putting out so many different species. And if you really go back and look at Star Wars, there are a lot of different species that show up just randomly, usually, depending upon the subject matter of the story. Q, welcome in. Queenie, welcome in. Sorry. And I just really wanted to cover this. I've covered the Nexu, and this was the Acklay that was featured in Attack of the Clones, and I'll be covering the last one in an upcoming fact. But I really love touching on these guys because they are such interesting creatures, and I always enjoy looking up the information about these. And the fact that this is part crustacean and part reptile, and I just thought that was so interesting that I thought at first that it was something else, but the fact that it's part crustacean really makes it interesting. And we see a lot of these kinds of crustacean creatures that show up every once in a while. We had that whole species that showed up in season 2 of The Bad Batch, which I thought was really cool. And they are scary. Abby, thank you for pointing that out. They are really scary. I mean, when this thing was going after Obi-Wan, I honestly was expecting this thing to actually get a hold of him. So it was really cool to actually see how Obi-Wan was able to work with it. The interesting thing that I thought was that Obi-Wan never tried to calm this one down. We did see this with Anakin actually trying to calming down the... Unfortunately, I forget the name. It's not a ram horn, but it's a different species that ends up going after him, and he's actually able to calm it down enough to ride it. And I always thought it was interesting that Obi-Wan did not try to calm this guy down. Of course, he was too intimidated, I think, at the time because this thing was so big. So I understand why he wasn't too keen on that. But I did feel bad that he had to kill it at the end. Because I was hoping that it was actually going to do more damage to the droids and stuff like that. Because it actually when the Geonosians actually brought it out, it actually killed a couple of the Geonosians as well. So I was expecting it to go after some of the droids, and it unfortunately didn't work out that way. But I just thought these creatures were so cool. I'm hoping at some point in time we'll have something take place on the planet, and we'll actually get to see these guys in action again. But who knows? That'll be something for the future. Okay, so I'm gonna actually move on to the next fact here. Star Wars fact of the day. Night Owls are a group of all-female Mandalorian warriors who are part of an extremist group known as the Death Watch, led by Bo-Katan of Clan Kryze, who served under Death Watch leader Pre Vizsla. The group were amongst the former governor's forces at his camp on Karlak during the Clone Wars after the group abandoned their hideout on Concordia. Following the end of the Mandalorian Civil War, the remaining Mandalorian martial traditionalists who believed in the old warrior ways of the Mandalore were exiled to the moon of Concordia. Eventually, the Death Watch. One of the subgroups of Death Watch designated itself the Night Owls. Working as intelligence assets for Death Watch, they would use their resources to make contact with outside sources in order to aid Death Watch with plans to retake Mandalore and reestablish the way of the Mandalore. The Night Owls were an integral part of the establishment of the Shadow Syndicate, but were unable to prevent the fall of Pre Vizsla to Maul. Half the Night Owls sided with Maul's forces under the belief that the one who holds the Darksaber had the right to rule Mandalore. Though Bo-Katan Kryze sided originally with Maul during the founding of the Shadow Syndicate, she declared that no outsider will ever rule Mandalore and took the remaining members of the Night Owls and Death Watch with her. After Bo-Katan reformed her loyal followers into the Mandalorian Resistance, the definition of Night Owl broadened in the process. While the term Night Owl previously referred only to a specific group of all-female warriors, every member of the Resistance became considered a Night Owl. Indeed, the faction also known as the Night Owl Resistance Group did reclaim Mandalore from Maul and the Syndicate. Bo-Katan would enlist the aid of Ahsoka Tano and the Galactic Republic for aid, leading to the Siege of Mandalore, combining the Night Owl Resistance and the 332nd Division of the 501st Legion. Unofficially, Bo-Katan inducted Ahsoka Tano into the Night Owls in recognition of her assistance in tracking down Maul and agreeing to assist with the reclaiming of Mandalore. This was done by awarding Ahsoka Tano an armor suit colored in the style of the Night Owls and having insignia of the Night Owls. After successfully restoring Mandalore, the events of Order 66 took place, and Mandalore now found itself under the control of the newly formed Galactic Empire. The Night Owl Resistance would reform into an alliance of multiple clans to fight against Imperial control over Mandalore. This sadly would culminate in the Night of 1,000 Tears and the Purge of Mandalore. The Empire bombarded the planet of Mandalore and its people, making the planet. The Night Owls and the majority of Mandalorians were now spread across the galaxy without a homeworld to call their own. It would take the fall of the Empire to finally bring and unite all Mandalorians together and retake their home planet from the clutches of the Empire. So thank you all to everybody who came in while I was chatting. I wanted to cover the Night Owls because I found that they are one of the few groups that is mentioned, but there's not a lot of history of them in Star Wars. And I wanted to, at least that I didn't know about it. And then when I went back and I started to actually research it, StarWars.com literally had nothing about them. I ended up having to go to Wikipedia.com to actually find information about the Night Owls. And it was really interesting. Now, some of this information might not be canon, but I did find out a few things that were canon, specifically about Ahsoka Tano being inducted into the Night Owls, which we actually see in the last season of the Clone Wars, is that Bo-Katan on unfortunately the name just slipped out of my head, the Pike's home planet, she recruits Ahsoka and asks her for assistance, and then the next episode we see Ahsoka with Bo-Katan, and they are requesting assistance from the New Republic to retake Mandalore and to capture Maul. And we actually see Ahsoka in the blue armor suit that she's actually wearing during that battle. And it's actually interesting. I went back and I actually looked at some of the information, and you can actually look this up on Wikipedia.com, that if you look at a lot of the Mandalorian, specifically the Night Owls with the owl symbol, Ahsoka actually has that on her suit of armor. It's hard to see. You actually have to go back through the Clone Wars episodes that she's wearing the armor, and you actually can see the insignias and all the different patchwork and stuff of the Mandalorians that is actually armor. So she actually does have that armor. The unfortunate thing, we don't know what happens to that suit after Order 66, because by the time we actually see Ahsoka again, she's no longer wearing it, as far as I know. Though I'm tempted to go back and actually double check to see. She might have just recolored it and it's what she's actually wearing. I'm not 100% sure, but I definitely want to go back and look, because that's some really cool Mandalorian armor, and I was wondering if she actually held on to it. So if you get a chance to look this up, it's really interesting. And the fact that of the forces of Death Watch, the Night Owls are one of the few groups that actually were part of the Mandalorian resistance from the Mandalorian Civil War that went all the way through the Clone Wars and still stayed active even after the Clone Wars ended. So I thought that was really interesting, and I really wanted to cover that fact because it's really cool. If you get a chance, I highly recommend going back and watching Clone Wars, because we really still don't have a full story on Bo-Katan and her sister, who is the governor of Mandalore when we first are introduced to Mandalore during the Clone Wars series. Her sister Satine, who is part of the group that is using pacification methods for Mandalore. Hey, Obi-Wan, welcome in. And this is the interesting thing, that during that time, the pacifist era, which was run by Bo-Katan's sister Satine of Clan Kryze, she's one of the few that are leading this group that is basically putting the warrior status aside. And it's really kind of dramatic to see how this all comes to be, but we never actually find or see a lot of interaction between Satine and Bo-Katan. There are a few moments where we get to see something during some of the episodes, but not a lot. So it's something you definitely have to go back and watch. It's mainly during, if I'm not mistaken, some of the scenes with sorry, I'm trying to remember it right now. Unfortunately, I don't remember the episodes, but it's the one where Obi-Wan is actually drawn to Mandalore. So it's a lot of those that you actually find out about, and it's some really interesting stuff. So I highly recommend looking it up. Okay, we're going to move on to the next fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day: probe droids are specifically designed for deep space exploration, reconnaissance, and science and military development. Tenacious hunters and searchers, they use manipulator arms and sensors to perform various tasks. Manufactured by Arachnid Industries, notable models including the DRK-1 Dark Eye probe droid and the Viper probe droid. They could be equipped with both shields and blasters. The droids communicated using omni-signal Unicode, which allowed for transmitting large amounts of data from long distances. Probe droids performed a large range of missions, from searching planets and wreckage for signs of life to conducting sensor scans of areas for mapping terrain. The Viper probe droid was used by a multitude of groups, ranging from bounty hunters, assassins, and most prominently with the Galactic Empire. Upon arrival at their target location, they gather information. If confronted after their main mission had been completed, these droids can self-destruct. Imperial probes are vaguely arachnid in shape, with a dark metal finish, bulbous sensor eyes, and spindly manipulator arms. They were deployed to great effect by the Empire when searching for the Rebel Alliance after the Battle of Yavin. In addition, after the fall of the Empire, these probe droids could be deployed as effective communication relays for Imperial operatives throughout the galaxy. Now, I really wanted to include this one in a fact of the day because it is such an interesting droid, and the funny thing is, sorry if I haven't been on in a while. Oh, Obi-Wan, that's fine. No worries, man. Oh, Bat Knight, absolutely, I agree about the Clone Wars. It is one of the best Star Wars shows. Absolutely, I agree. And the interesting thing is the probe droids are actually featured in Clone Wars, which is part of the reason why I wanted to include them, because they're included not only in the original Star Wars trilogy, they do make an appearance in the prequel trilogy, but they mainly are used both in Star Wars Clone Wars, and they actually show up in several episodes beyond that. Like, we see them in The Mandalorian and Bad Batch and several other shows, and they're really used effectively, not only as spy droids, but also as communication assets. But they were also used kind of like how we send like droids and robots to other planets. That's basically what the probe droids are, is they're designed for not only, military use, but also for scientific uses. And we see there's other different types of probe droids, but I really wanted to focus on this one. And I plan on going into a few other probe droids eventually, but I really wanted to focus on this one specifically because it's one of my favorite scenes, is of course in Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, where this guy comes down, he discovers the Echo base, and then communicates back to the Empire, and then we get the whole battle and everything. And it's all because of this one probe droid. And I always thought it was really interesting at the beginning of the movie is you have that scene from underneath the Death Star, or not the Death Star, the Star Destroyer, and all of a sudden these little guys just show up, and they just kind of launch out, and they just fly across the galaxy and all that. And I really liked that interesting thing. But the cool thing that I always thought was interesting about that is that scene takes place in only a few seconds. But the interesting thing about Star Wars is how time is conveyed. Is that obviously these probe droids could not, just end up on a planet like in a few seconds. That it was probably several weeks for them to actually get to a location. And then we find out later about the communication getting back to the Empire, but we have no idea exactly how long it takes place. So there's that whole aspect in Star Wars that you always have to remember, that not everything is happening simultaneously, that it's happening over several weeks and stuff like that. And that's one of the interesting things that I love about Star Wars, is that they do take that into account. But it's always up to the audience to realize, oh wait, this isn't happening as quickly as I think it is. And I always thought that was really cool. Do you think Darth Vader's suit would practically in real life? Honestly, the funny thing is that there are a lot of people right now that are highly working with cybernetics and stuff like that. So there's a chance that basically those kinds of things, basically the oxygen systems that they currently use in a lot of hospitals are very similar to the systems that Darth Vader uses. And a lot of the new technologies that are coming about skin grafting and artificial limbs and stuff like that, a lot of that is inspired from the stuff that was used in Star Wars. So there's a very good chance that could actually become a reality. And that's part of the reason why I love Star Wars, is that it actually inspires the imagination enough that people are actually trying to make it so if someone was so badly injured as Darth Vader, that person could easily go on to live a very fulfilling life, granted living as a partial cyborg, but at the same time, it's a possibility. And there's a lot of people that are actually working towards that. Exactly, Abby. It's something that you really need to think about, is that Star Wars has inspired so many different things, and it's really possible that this stuff could actually happen in real life. So it's a possibility. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last fact of the day. So let me just move forward here. Star Wars fact of the day. Imperial Star Destroyer. This wedge-shaped starship is bristling with weapon emplacements, turbo lasers, ion cannons, and tractor beam projectors that dot its surface. Designed and manufactured by the Quad Drive Yards for use by the Imperial Navy and part of the Imperial-class line, the 1,600-meter-long capital ship, longer than its immediate predecessor, the Venator-class Star Destroyer, could be used to subjugate a planet or serve as a command ship for other vessels. In addition to its wide range of weapons, the Imperial-class Star Destroyers are able to carry assault troops, boarding craft, and 72 TIE Fighter series starfighters. Besides its TIE Fighter squadrons, the ship also carries 8 Lambda-class TA shuttles, 20 AT-AT walkers, 30 AT-ST or AD-DP walkers, and 15 Imperial troop transports. They could also carry several aerial landing platforms for use during planetary invasions. 37,000 crew on board, 9,235 officers, and 27,850 enlisted personnel. The complement of 9,700 stormtroopers added to the total of 46,785 crew and passengers, with 2,000 of those being the bare minimum required to safely operate the ship. The Imperial class was heavily shielded, and its armored durasteel plating durable enough to withstand a direct collision with a GR-75 medium transport with no hull damage. Situated at the ventral side of the bow of the ISD, Imperial Star Destroyer, was a navigational deflector generator, accompanied by a hull deflector shield generator nearer towards the vessel's rear. 2 ISD 72X shield generator domes were present above the top of the command tower. These massive ships served as the front line of oppression for the Galactic Empire, essentially in the Imperial doctrine of planetary containment and fast infantry deployment, and the vessels was noted as one of the most resource-intensive ships in the Imperial Navy. Imperial-class vessels proved less effective against skilled rebel pilots when their Venator-class predecessors had been more effective against droid starfighters. Designed primarily for planetary subjugation, the capital ship-to-ship confrontation and capital ship-to-ship confrontation, rebel intelligence had found weaknesses in the capital ship design. This made it possible for rebel ships scoring a direct hit from proton torpedoes at the engines, which could cause a breach in the ship's generator venting tunnel, causing the reactor to overload and explode, disabling the destroyer. Ion torpedoes could also disable an Imperial-class Star Destroyer if the shields were weakened from a capital ship fire or repeated torpedo attacks. Now, everybody knows the Imperial Star Destroyer, and we all know that these ships were difficult to destroy, but I always thought it was interesting, at least from my point of view, that so many of the games I played, you literally, one of your tasks was to actually take on these things, and it was possible for disabling it. So it was always a great and interesting ship, and I always loved looking into it. And just doing the research on this, there was so much more, because there's not just one class of Imperial Star Destroyer. There's at least 3 variations of the Imperial Star Destroyer. There's the Imperial class, the Imperial class 2, and of course we have the Victory class, and there's also a couple other different ones. And we actually see variations of these throughout Star Wars. So I always recommend to people to look up these ships because they are so interesting. And I love the fact that we actually get a chance to actually see them in action. Some of them we do and some of them we don't. Because there's the Victory Star Destroyer was a lot smaller than the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. And there was also the Imperial 2 Star Destroyer was actually bigger than the Imperial, the original Imperial class that we see in a lot of the early stages of Star Wars. And it was actually You actually see this in Empire Strikes Back that there's multiple Star Destroyers of varying sizes and shapes. And you actually see it also in Return of the Jedi when the Imperial fleet comes to engage. So it's always interesting to check these things out. And I just really wanted to go into research about this because it's one of my favorite things to always argue with some of my friends back in school is how would an Imperial Star Destroyer, stand up to other, sci-fi craft like, of course, the Enterprise and the Battlestar Galactica and all that kind of stuff. We'd always vary by size and what the weapons did and stuff like that. So I really just wanted to cover the Imperial Star Destroyer because it's one of the more impressive looking ships, but it's also the one that everybody knows is like the main representation of the Empire. So I really wanted to cover that. So thanks to everybody who came in tonight to watch.